The morning sun was shining bright over Beverly Hills as 17-year-old Derek pulled his phone out to check his bank account one more time. The numbers on the screen made him smile. After months of working late shifts at a local tech company, cleaning offices and helping with basic computer tasks, he had finally saved up $15,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for what he had planned. His younger brother Kevin, just 16, was sitting on their apartment couch, playing video games when Derek walked over and tapped him on the shoulder. "Want to come with me on a special mission today?" Derek asked with a grin. Kevin paused his game and looked up. "What kind of mission?" "The kind where we go look at cars. Nice cars." Kevin's eyes lit up. He knew his older brother had been saving money for something special, but Derek had been keeping the details secret. "Are you finally going to tell me what this is all about?" Derek sat down next to his brother. "You know how Lisa's been talking about her graduation coming up? How she's been stressed about everything?" Kevin nodded. Lisa had been Derek's girlfriend for 2 years, and she was like a big sister to him. She was always helping Kevin with his homework and bringing him snacks when she came over to visit. "Well, I want to surprise her with something amazing. She's been taking the bus to her job at the coffee shop every day, and I know she's been worried about how she's going to get to her new job after graduation. So I thought maybe I could help her out." "You're going to buy her a car?" Kevin's mouth dropped open. "That's the plan. I've been looking online, and I think I found the perfect place. It's called Elite Motors, and they have some really nice cars that aren't too expensive. Want to come check it out with me?" Kevin jumped up from the couch so fast he almost knocked over his soda. "Are you kidding? Of course I want to come." The two brothers got ready quickly. Derek put on his best jeans and a clean hoodie while Kevin did the same. Their mom was at work. She always worked double shifts at the hospital on weekends, so they left her a note saying they'd be back later. The bus ride to Beverly Hills took about 40 minutes. As they got closer to the fancy part of town, Kevin pressed his face against the window, watching the big houses and expensive shops go by. "Man, this place is crazy," Kevin whispered. "Look at that house. It's like 3 times bigger than our whole apartment building." Derek was feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had called the dealership earlier in the week to ask about their cars, and the person on the phone had been friendly enough. But now that they were actually here, he was starting to worry. What if they didn't take him seriously? What if $15,000 wasn't enough? When they got off the bus, they walked 2 blocks to Elite Motors. The building was huge and made of glass with shiny cars parked outside and big windows where you could see even more cars inside. Everything looked expensive and perfect. "Wow," Kevin said under his breath. "This place is fancy." Derek took a deep breath. "Remember what Mom always says. Walk tall, speak clearly, and treat everyone with respect." They pushed through the glass doors and stepped inside. The showroom was even more impressive than it looked from outside. The floors were so clean they looked like mirrors, and the cars were positioned like pieces of art. There were sports cars, luxury sedans, and SUVs that looked like they belonged in movies. Almost immediately, a woman with blonde hair and a tight business suit walked over to them. Her name tag said Jennifer, and she had the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you boys?" she asked, but her tone suggested she didn't really want to help them at all. Derek straightened up and put on his most polite voice. "Yes, ma'am. I'm interested in looking at some cars. I'm hoping to make a purchase today." Jennifer looked them up and down, taking in their casual clothes and young faces. Her fake smile got even faker. "I see. And what exactly are you looking for?" "Something reliable and nice looking. Maybe a sedan or a small SUV. My budget is $15,000 for a down payment, and I can finance the rest." Jennifer actually laughed. Not a nice laugh, but the kind of laugh you make when you think someone just told a joke that wasn't funny. "Honey, I think you might be in the wrong place. The cars here start at about $50,000. Even with financing, you'd need to put down at least $20,000. And that's assuming you have good credit and a steady job." Derek felt his cheeks get warm, but he kept his voice calm. "I do have a steady job, and I've been working on building my credit. Could we maybe look at what you have available? I'm flexible on the exact model. Before Jennifer could answer, a man in an expensive suit walked over. His name tag said Manager Richard Cole, and he looked even less friendly than Jennifer. Is there a problem here? He asked, looking directly at Derek and Kevin like they were troublemakers. These boys think they want to buy a car, Jennifer said, and Derek noticed she emphasized the word think like she didn't believe it. Richard crossed his arms. I see. And how old are you boys? I'm 17, and this is my brother Kevin. He's 16, 17. Richard shook his head. You know, even if you had the money, which I seriously doubt, you can't even sign a contract until you're 18, and your parents would need to co-sign, assuming they have good enough credit. Derek was starting to feel frustrated, but he tried to stay patient. Actually, sir, I turn 18 next month, and my mom already agreed to co-sign if needed. She has good credit. Could we maybe just look at a few cars? I promise I'm serious about making a purchase. Richard and Jennifer exchanged a look that Derek didn't like at all. Look, kids, Richard said, I'm going to be straight with you. This isn't the place for you. The cars here are serious investments for serious buyers. We're not a place where teenagers come to window shop or waste people's time. Kevin spoke up for the first time. My brother isn't window shopping. He's been saving money for months. Saving money, Jennifer repeated with another one of those fake laughs. That's sweet. But even if you have a few $100s saved, that's not going to cut it here. Derek pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. Ma'am, I have $15,000 saved up. I can show you right here. Richard held up his hand. Anyone can fake a bank statement on their phone. Look, I'm going to ask you boys to leave now. You're making our other customers uncomfortable. Derek looked around. There were only 2 other people in the showroom, and they were way on the other side looking at a sports car. They weren't even paying attention to what was happening. Sir, we're not bothering anyone. We're just asking to look at cars. And I'm telling you to leave, Richard said, his voice getting louder. Before I have to call security. Derek felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He'd worked so hard for this money, and he'd been so excited about surprising Lisa. Now, he was being kicked out like he was some kind of criminal. Kevin grabbed his brother's arm. Come on, Derek, let's just go. But Derek wasn't ready to give up yet. Could I maybe speak to the owner or someone else who might be able to help us? Richard stepped closer, and Derek could smell his expensive cologne. I am the manager here, and what I say goes. You boys need to leave right now, or I'm going to call the police and tell them we have trespassers who won't leave. That's when Derek realized that nothing he said was going to matter. These people had already made up their minds about who he and Kevin were based on how they looked and how old they were. It didn't matter that he had money saved up or that he had a job or that he was serious about making a purchase. Fine, Derek said quietly. We'll leave. As they walked toward the door, Derek heard Jennifer say to Richard, I swear, these kids today think they can just walk into anywhere and demand service. The brothers stepped outside into the bright sunshine, but Derek felt like a dark cloud was following him. Kevin was quiet until they got to the bus stop. That was messed up. Kevin finally said. Derek nodded, still feeling angry and embarrassed. Yeah, it really was. What they didn't know was that another customer in the showroom had been watching the whole thing. And that customer had been recording everything on their phone, thinking that what just happened was so wrong that the world needed to see it. The bus ride home felt like the longest trip of Derek's life. He stared out the window, watching the fancy houses of Beverly Hills disappear behind them, replaced by the regular neighborhoods where normal people lived. Kevin sat next to him, occasionally glancing over with concern but not saying much. When they finally got back to their apartment building, Derek went straight to his room and flopped down on his bed. All those months of working late nights, saving every dollar he could, dreaming about the look on Lisa's face when he surprised her with a car. It all felt pointless now. Kevin knocked on his door about an hour later. Derek, you okay? Yeah, just thinking. Want to talk about it? Derek sat up and opened his door. I just don't get it, you know? I had the money. I was ready to buy a car. But they looked at us and decided we weren't worth their time. Kevin came in and sat on Derek's desk chair. Maybe we should tell Mom when she gets home. And say what? That some car salespeople were mean to us? She's got enough to worry about without hearing about our problems. Their mom, Patricia, worked as a nurse at the county hospital. She'd been doing double shifts ever since their dad passed away in a car accident 5 years ago. Derek and Kevin had learned not to burden her with small problems when she was already dealing with so much. Around 6 o'clock, Derek's phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, social media alerts, missed calls. He picked up his phone, confused about why everyone was trying to reach him. The first text was from his girlfriend Lisa. "Derek, are you okay? Someone sent me this video and I think it's you and Kevin." His heart started racing. What video? The next message was from his co-worker at the tech company. "Dude, is this really you? This is going viral." Derek opened his social media app and immediately saw what everyone was talking about. A video with the caption, "Discrimination at Elite Motors. 2 teens kicked out for no reason," had been posted 3 hours ago and already had 50,000 views. He pressed play and watched, in shock as he saw himself and Kevin from earlier that day. Someone had recorded the entire interaction with Jennifer and Richard from across the showroom. The audio was clear enough to hear every word. Watching it back, Derek was struck by how professional and polite he had been throughout the whole thing. He could see himself showing his banking app, explaining about his job, asking respectfully to just look at cars. And he could see how dismissive and rude Jennifer and Richard had been in response. "Kevin," he called out, "you need to see this." His brother came running and they watched the video together. By the time it ended, Kevin was shaking his head in disbelief. Someone was recording the whole time? Derek scrolled through the comments. There were hundreds already and more appearing every few seconds. "This is disgusting behavior from that dealership. Those boys were so polite and respectful. The staff should be ashamed. I'm never buying from Elite Motors after seeing this. Someone needs to identify these employees and make sure they face consequences." Derek's phone rang. It was Lisa. "Hey," he answered. "Derek, honey, are you okay? I just saw the video. I can't believe they treated you and Kevin like that." "I'm okay. Just embarrassed that everyone's seeing it now." "Embarrassed? Derek, you have nothing to be embarrassed about. You handled that situation with so much class. Those people should be embarrassed." After he hung up with Lisa, Derek noticed the video had jumped to over 100,000 views. People were sharing it on different platforms, and news outlets were starting to pick it up. His phone rang again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Hi, is this Derek Johnson?" The voice belonged to a woman who sounded professional. "Yes, this is Derek. My name is Amanda Rodriguez, and I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. I was wondering if you'd be available for a brief interview about what happened at Elite Motors today." Derek's mouth went dry. "A news interview? We've seen the video that's circulating, and we'd like to give you a chance to tell your side of the story. It would just be a few questions, and we could do it over the phone if you're more comfortable that way." Derek looked at Kevin, who was listening to the conversation with wide eyes. "Can I think about it and call you back?" "Of course. Here's my direct number." Over the next hour, Derek received calls from 3 more news stations, 2 newspapers, and several social media influencers who wanted to interview him. The video was being shared so fast that Derek couldn't keep track of all the platforms where it was appearing. By the time their mom got home from work at 8 o'clock, the video had over 500,000 views and was trending on multiple social media platforms. Patricia walked through the door looking tired, as she always did after a long shift. But when she saw Derek and Kevin sitting on the couch with serious expressions, her exhaustion quickly turned to concern. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Derek and Kevin looked at each other. They had decided not to tell her about the dealership incident, but now that it was all over the internet, they didn't have much choice. "Mom, you should probably sit down," Derek said. Patricia set down her purse and sat in her favorite chair. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" Derek explained everything that had happened at Elite Motors, from his plan to surprise Lisa with a car, to the way they'd been treated by the staff. As he talked, Patricia's expression went from confusion to anger to heartbreak. "They said what to you?" she asked when Derek got to the part about Richard threatening to call the police. "It's okay, Mom, we left and we're fine." "It is not okay," Patricia said firmly. "No one should treat my sons that way. No one should treat anyone that way." Kevin pulled out his phone. "Mom, there's something else. Someone recorded the whole thing and now it's all over the internet." He showed her the video. Patricia watched in silence, but Derek could see her hands clenching into fists as Jennifer and Richard dismissed her sons. When the video ended, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "I am so proud of how you both handled yourselves," she finally said. "You were respectful and mature even when those people were being completely inappropriate. But now everyone's going to see it," Derek said. "It's embarrassing." Patricia reached over and took both of her sons' hands. "Derek, Kevin, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. The people who should be embarrassed are the ones who treated you poorly." Derek's phone buzzed with another notification. The hashtag, Liger Justice for Derek and Kevin, was now trending nationally. "Look at this," Kevin said, scrolling through the social media responses. People are posting stories about similar things that happened to them. And look, some people are organizing a boycott of Elite Motors. Patricia read over Kevin's shoulder. "Good. Maybe this will make them think twice before treating other customers this way." What none of them knew was that 3,000 miles away in New York City, a billionaire tech entrepreneur named David Thompson was sitting in his hotel room, watching the same video that millions of other people had seen that day. David had built his fortune from nothing, creating a revolutionary software company that he eventually sold for over $3 billion. He was in New York for a tech conference, but he'd been scrolling through social media during a break between meetings when the video appeared on his feed. Something about the story caught his attention. Maybe it was the way the young men had handled themselves with such dignity, or maybe it was the injustice of the situation. But as David watched Derek show his banking app to prove he had money saved, something clicked in his mind. The last name on the bank account Derek had briefly shown was Johnson, and when Derek mentioned working at a tech company, David felt a strange sense of familiarity. After the video ended, David did something he rarely did. He picked up his phone and called his head of security. "Michael, I need you to look into something, for me." Discreetly. David had been searching for his estranged brother's family for years. His brother Michael had disappeared after a bitter family argument 15 years ago, and despite hiring the best private investigators money could buy, David had never been able to find him. But something about Derek Johnson reminded him of Michael at that age. The way he carried himself, the determination in his voice, even some of his facial features. "Sir, what exactly are you looking for?" Michael asked. "I'm sending you a video. There's a young man in it named Derek Johnson. I want to know everything about him and his family, tonight." As David ended the call, he had a feeling that his search might finally be over, and if his suspicions were correct, the story that was already making headlines was about to become something much bigger than anyone could have imagined. David Thompson sat in his luxury hotel suite overlooking Central Park, staring at his laptop screen. It was past midnight, but sleep was the last thing on his mind. His head of security, Michael Rodriguez, had sent over a detailed report about Derek Johnson and his family, and what David had discovered made his hands shake as he read. The investigation had revealed that Derek and Kevin Johnson were the sons of Michael Johnson, formerly Michael Thompson, David's younger brother who had disappeared from his life 15 years ago after a devastating family argument. David's mind raced back to that terrible night. He had been 25 then, already successful with his first tech startup, while Michael was just 22 and working as a community college instructor. Their parents had died in a plane crash 2 years earlier, leaving them as each other's only family. The fight had been about money and values. David had wanted Michael to join his company, to help him build an empire. But Michael had accused David of caring more about profits than people, of treating his employees poorly, of losing sight of what really mattered in life. "You've become everything I don't want to be," Michael had shouted that night. Money has changed you, David. You used to care about people. David had been furious. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something huge and you're throwing it back in my face. I don't want any part of your world, Michael had replied. And if this is who you're going to be, then I don't want any part of your life either. That was the last time they had spoken. Michael had moved away, changed his last name, and completely disappeared. David had tried to find him for years, but Michael had been very careful to leave no trail. Now, reading the report on his laptop, David learned that Michael had moved to Los Angeles, where he met and married Patricia Williams, a nursing student. When they got married, Michael had taken her last name, becoming Michael Johnson. He continued teaching at community colleges, and they had 2 sons, Derek and Kevin. The report also contained the most heartbreaking news of all. Michael had died 5 years ago in a car accident, leaving Patricia to raise the boys alone on a faux nurse's salary. David closed his laptop and walked to the window. Below him, the city was quiet except for the occasional taxi. He thought about his brother who had chosen a simple life of teaching and family over wealth and success. He thought about Patricia, working double shifts to support her sons. And he thought about Derek and Kevin, who had been raised with the same values that Michael had always believed in: respect, dignity, and hard work. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here were his nephews being mistreated because of their appearance and age, while their billionaire uncle was 3,000 miles away, completely unaware they existed. David picked up his phone and called his assistant. Jenny, I know it's late, but I need you to book me on the first flight to Los Angeles tomorrow morning. Of course, Mr. Thompson. May I ask what this is regarding? You have 3 meetings scheduled tomorrow afternoon. Cancel them. This is more important than any meeting. Should I arrange for your usual hotel in Beverly Hills? David paused. No. Book me somewhere closer to the downtown area. And Jenny, I need you to research everything you can about Elite Motors. Who owns it, their business practices, any legal issues they've had. I want a complete file. I'll have everything ready by the time you land. After hanging up, David spent the rest of the night reading every article he could find about the viral video. The story had exploded across social media, with millions of people sharing it and expressing outrage at how Derek and Kevin had been treated. He also spent time learning about his nephews' lives. Derek was clearly intelligent and hardworking, saving money from his part-time job to buy his girlfriend a car. Kevin was doing well in school and seemed to be a good kid. Patricia had raised them to be respectful and determined, just like Michael would have wanted. The next morning, David's private jet landed at LAX. As his car drove through the city toward his hotel, he felt nervous in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He was about to meet family he didn't know existed, and he had no idea how they would react to learning who he was. But first, he had some business to take care of. Elite Motors opened at 9 o'clock, and David arrived at 9:15. He had dressed carefully for the occasion, an expensive but understated suit, his best watch, and he was driving a brand new Rolls-Royce that he'd had delivered to his hotel that morning. When he walked into the showroom, the difference in treatment was immediate and obvious. Jennifer rushed over to greet him, her smile genuine this time because she saw a wealthy customer who could afford the cars they were selling. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Elite Motors. I'm Jennifer, and I'd be delighted to help you find the perfect vehicle today. David smiled politely. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm looking for something special. Multiple vehicles, actually. I run a large company, and we're updating our executive fleet. Jennifer's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of customer she loved. Someone with money who was ready to buy multiple expensive cars. Wonderful. Let me show you some of our finest options. Are you interested in sedans, SUVs, or perhaps some of our luxury sports cars? I'm open to seeing everything, David said. Price is not a concern. As Jennifer led him around the showroom, pointing out features and benefits of various vehicles, David was recording everything on his phone. He wanted to document exactly how differently he was being treated compared to Derek and Kevin. After about 20 minutes, Richard Cole approached them. Good morning, sir. I'm Richard Cole, the manager here. Jennifer tells me you're interested in purchasing multiple vehicles for your company. That's correct, David said. I'm very impressed with your selection here. Excellent. We pride ourselves on providing the finest luxury vehicles and the best customer service in Beverly Hills. What kind of business are you in, if you don't mind me asking? Technology, David replied. I founded and sold a software company. Now I invest in other tech startups. Richard's attitude became even more deferential. How exciting! The tech industry has certainly created a lot of successful entrepreneurs. We're honored to have you considering our dealership for your fleet needs. David nodded, then decided it was time to reveal why he was really there. You know, Richard, I actually heard about your dealership from a video I saw online. It's been getting quite a bit of attention on social media. Richard's smile faltered slightly. A video? Yes, it showed two young men who came in here yesterday. They were interested in purchasing a vehicle, but it seemed like there was some kind of misunderstanding. The color began to drain from Richard's face. Oh, you mean those kids who came in yesterday? That was just a simple miscommunication. Really? David pulled out his phone and showed Richard the viral video. Because from what I can see here, those young men were very polite and respectful. They had money saved up and were serious about making a purchase, but they were treated quite poorly. Jennifer, who had been listening to the conversation, stepped closer. Sir, I can explain. Those boys were very young, and we get a lot of teenagers who come in here just to look around and waste our time. I see, David said. So you assumed they were wasting your time without even giving them a chance to prove otherwise? Richard tried to recover. Sir, we certainly didn't mean any disrespect. If there was a misunderstanding, I'm sure we can resolve it. Are you perhaps related to those young men? David smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. As a matter of fact, I am. Derek and Kevin Johnson are my nephews. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's mouth fell open, and Richard looked like he might be sick. Your nephews? Richard stammered. That's right. And I have to say, I'm extremely disappointed in how they were treated. They came here with genuine interest in making a purchase. They had money saved up, and they were nothing but polite and respectful. Yet they were dismissed, insulted, and ultimately asked to leave. David paused, letting his words sink in. Now, I'm a businessman, Richard. I understand that customer service can be challenging, but what I saw in that video wasn't challenging customer service. It was discrimination, pure and simple. Richard's face was now completely white. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Thompson. David Thompson. David watched as recognition dawned on Richard's face. Anyone in business had heard of David Thompson, the tech billionaire who had sold his company for over $3 billion. Mr. Thompson, Richard said, his voice shaking. I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. If we had known. If you had known what? David interrupted. If you had known they were related to someone wealthy, that's exactly the problem. Richard, every customer who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with respect regardless of their age, their appearance, or who they might be related to. Jennifer tried to speak up. Mr. Thompson, perhaps we could make this right. Somehow, we could offer your nephews a discount or... David held up his hand. You've already shown me exactly who you are and how your business operates. The question now is what we're going to do about it. David had come here planning to confront the people who had mistreated his nephews. But now he realized this was about much more than just getting an apology. This was about justice and about making sure other young people wouldn't face the same discrimination that Derek and Kevin had experienced. And he was just getting started. David Thompson pulled out his phone and started recording as he continued his conversation with Richard and Jennifer. He wanted everything documented for what was about to happen next. Mr. Thompson, Richard said, sweat visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Please let me call the owner. I'm sure Mr. Morrison would want to speak with you personally about this situation. Yes, I think that would be a very good idea, David replied calmly. While Richard fumbled with his phone to call the owner, David looked around the showroom. Several other employees had gathered nearby, sensing that something important was happening. A few customers had also stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. Jennifer, meanwhile, was trying to salvage the situation. Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that we absolutely do not tolerate discrimination here. What happened yesterday was an isolated incident, and we're committed to making sure it never happens again. David raised an eyebrow. An isolated incident? Jennifer, less than 24 hours ago, you looked at two polite, well-dressed young men and immediately assumed they couldn't afford to be here. You didn't ask about their budget, you didn't try to help them find something in their price range, and you didn't treat them with even basic courtesy. That doesn't sound isolated to me. That sounds like standard operating procedure. Before Jennifer could respond, a man in his 50s rushed into the showroom. He was clearly the owner, Paul Morrison, and he looked like he'd been pulled away from something important. His tie was crooked, and he kept running his hand through his hair. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "Paul Morrison, owner of Elite Motors. I understand there's been some kind of misunderstanding." David shook his hand but didn't smile. "Mr. Morrison, I wouldn't call it a misunderstanding. I'd call it a clear case of discrimination against my nephews." Paul's face. David pulled out his phone and showed them some old photos he'd kept all these years. Pictures of him and Michael as kids, playing in their backyard, riding bikes, celebrating birthdays. In every photo, the family resemblance between Michael and his sons was obvious. "He loved you boys so much," Patricia said, looking at the photos. "You both have so much of him in you. Derek, you have his determination and his kind heart. Kevin, you have his sense of humor and his way of seeing the best in people. I wish I could have known him as an adult," David said. "I wish I could have met you, Patricia, and I wish I could have watched Derek and Kevin grow up." Kevin, who had been mostly quiet, finally spoke up. "What happens now?" David looked at each of them carefully. "That's up to you. I know this is a lot to process, and I don't want to push my way into your lives just because we're family, but I'd like to try to make up for lost time, if you'll let me." "What do you mean?" Derek asked. "Well, first I want to make sure Elite Motors follows through on their promises. Paul Morrison is going to call you to apologize personally, and he's going to offer you a car at cost. But honestly, Derek, you shouldn't buy from them even at cost. There are plenty of other dealerships that would be happy to earn your business." David paused, then continued. "I'd also like to help with college expenses if that's something you're interested in. Not because I think you need handouts, but because education was something Michael always valued, and I think he'd want me to support his son's dreams." Patricia shook her head. "David, we can't accept money from you. We've managed on our own for 5 years. And you've done an amazing job," David said sincerely. "Look at how these boys handled themselves at that dealership. They were respectful, polite, and dignified even when they were being treated terribly. That's because of how you raised them, Patricia." Derek had been thinking while the adults talked. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "The video of what happened to us is everywhere now. People are angry about how we were treated. But what if this hadn't happened? What if we hadn't gone to that dealership, or if no one had recorded it? Would you have ever found us?" David considered the question. "I don't know, maybe not. But I like to think that somehow, someday, we would have found each other. Family has a way of coming back together, even when it seems impossible." Over the next 2 hours, they talked about Michael, sharing stories and memories. Patricia told David about their wedding, about how excited Michael had been when the boys were born, about his work as a teacher and how much his students loved him. David shared stories from their childhood, funny moments and adventures that helped Derek and Kevin understand a side of their father they'd never known. When it was time to leave, David stood up slowly. "I know this is overwhelming. I don't expect you to make any decisions right now about what kind of relationship we might have going forward. But I hope you'll think about it." Patricia stood up too. "David, Michael would be so happy to know that his family is finally together again. I think he'd want us to try." Derek and Kevin nodded in agreement. "There's one more thing," David said. "Richard and Jennifer were both fired from Elite Motors this afternoon. Paul Morrison called me to confirm it. He's also implementing the changes we discussed, and he'll be starting that scholarship program we talked about. Good, Kevin said firmly. Maybe other people won't have to go through what we did. 3 months later, Derek was working as a paid intern at one of David's tech companies, learning about software development and discovering that he had inherited some of his father's teaching abilities. He was great at explaining complex concepts to other people. Kevin had decided to focus on his studies for now, but he was spending weekends volunteering at a community center that David had helped fund. Patricia had been able to reduce her working hours and was taking classes to finish her nursing degree, something she'd always dreamed of doing but never had the time or money for. The incident at Elite Motors had sparked a national conversation about discrimination in retail establishments. The hashtag #Justice for Derek and Kevin had led to thousands of people sharing their own stories of being judged or mistreated based on their appearance or age. Elite Motors had kept their promises. They'd implemented comprehensive customer service, training, created the scholarship program, and had even hired a diversity consultant to help them build a more inclusive culture. Paul Morrison had personally delivered Derek's apology and had offered him any car on the lot it cost, though Derek had ultimately decided to buy from a different dealership that had reached out to offer him an even better deal. But perhaps most importantly, David had found his way back to family. He and Patricia had become close friends, bonding over their shared love for Michael's memory and their desire to support Derek and Kevin. The boys had embraced their uncle, curious about this new family member who shared their father's eyes and their grandmother's laugh. They still lived in their same apartment. Patricia had insisted on that, wanting to maintain their independence. But now they had something they'd never had before: the security of knowing that if anything went wrong, if any emergency arose, they had family who would be there for them. On Sundays, they'd often meet for dinner, and David would tell stories about Michael's childhood, filling in pieces of their father's history that the boys had never known. And sometimes, late at night, Patricia would look at old photos of Michael and feel grateful that even though he was gone, he had somehow found a way to bring his family back together. The viral video that had started it all was still being shared months later, but now it was usually accompanied by updates about the positive changes that had resulted from Derek and Kevin's experience. People used it as an example of how standing up to discrimination could lead to real change, and how sometimes the most unexpected events could bring families together. Derek never did buy Lisa a car with that $15,000 he'd saved. Instead, David had helped him invest the money, and Lisa had been so impressed with Derek's maturity and his family's story that she'd fallen in love with him all over again. As for Elite Motors, they'd become known as one of the most welcoming dealerships in the city. The sign that David had sarcastically suggested, "All customers welcome," now hung prominently in their front window, and Paul Morrison made sure every employee understood that it wasn't just a slogan, but a promise. The story that had begun with injustice and discrimination had ended with family, forgiveness, and the kind of positive change that Michael Johnson would have been proud to see his sons inspire. Pale. Like Richard, he obviously knew who David Thompson was, and he understood the implications of having upset such a powerful person. Your nephews? Derek and Kevin Johnson, 2 young men who came in here yesterday with $15,000, saved up, looking to purchase a vehicle. Instead of being helped, they were mocked, dismissed, and eventually asked to leave by your manager here. Paul looked over at Richard, who was now staring at the floor like he wished it would open up and swallow him. Mr. Thompson, I am deeply sorry. This is absolutely not how we conduct business here. Richard, what happened? Richard cleared his throat nervously. Well, sir, these 2 kids came in yesterday and they seemed young, and I thought— You thought what? David interrupted. You thought that because they were young and dressed casually, they couldn't possibly be serious customers? I made an error in judgment, Richard admitted. You made multiple errors in judgment, David corrected. You assumed they didn't have money without asking. You questioned whether their savings were legitimate. You implied they might be criminals. And when they remained polite and professional despite your poor treatment, you threatened to call the police on them. Paul looked horrified. Richard, is this true? Sir, I was just trying to— Richard, Paul said firmly, please go to your office. We'll discuss this later. After Richard left, Paul turned back to David. Mr. Thompson, I cannot begin to express how sorry I am. This is absolutely not the standard of service we strive for at Elite Motors. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your apology, but I need to be honest with you. This isn't just about an apology anymore. The video of how my nephews were treated has been viewed by millions of people. Your dealership's reputation has been severely damaged, and rightfully so. Paul nodded grimly. I've seen the video. It's terrible. We've already received hundreds of angry phone calls and emails. Good, David said bluntly. Maybe that will motivate you to make some real changes around here. What would you suggest? David had been thinking about this since he'd watched the video the night before. First, Richard and Jennifer need to be terminated immediately. What they did was unacceptable, and if they remain employed here, it sends the message that this kind of behavior is tolerable. Jennifer started to protest, but Paul held up his hand to silence her. Second, David continued, you need to implement comprehensive training for all your staff about treating customers with respect, regardless of their age, appearance, or perceived financial status. Absolutely, Paul agreed. What else? Third, I want you to personally call my nephews and apologize, not because I'm asking you to, but because it's the right thing to do. Of course, I'll call them today. David wasn't finished. And fourth, I want you to offer Derek the car he was originally looking for at cost. No markup, no hidden fees, no strings attached. Paul nodded quickly. Done. Anything else? David smiled, for the first time since he'd entered the dealership. Actually, yes, I want you to create a scholarship program. Every year, you'll provide a reliable used car to a deserving young person who needs transportation to get to work or school, but can't afford it. That's a wonderful idea, Paul said, and he actually seemed to mean it. I'm glad you think so, because I'm going to be watching to make sure you follow through. And Mr. Morrison, if I hear about anyone else being treated the way my nephews were treated, you'll be dealing with more than just bad publicity. Paul swallowed hard. I understand completely, Mr. Thompson. David looked around the showroom one more time. Jennifer, you should start looking for a new job. I'll be sharing this recording with my social media followers, so I'd recommend finding employment somewhere that values customer service. Jennifer's face was red with anger and embarrassment, but she didn't say anything. Mr. Morrison, you have my contact information. I expect to hear from you within 24 hours with a detailed plan for how you're going to implement these changes. You'll have it, Paul promised. As David walked toward the exit, he turned back one more time. Oh, and Paul, you might want to put a sign up front that says all customers welcome. Apparently, some people need the reminder. David left Elite Motors feeling satisfied, but knowing that his work was far from over. Now came the part he was most nervous about, meeting his nephews and sister-in-law. He drove to a quiet coffee shop in their neighborhood and sent Derek a text message. He'd gotten Derek's number from the private investigator's report. Hi, Derek. This is David Thompson. I saw the video of what happened to you and Kevin at Elite Motors. I'd like to meet with you and your family to discuss it. Are you available to meet this afternoon? Derek's response came back quickly. Mr. Thompson, the tech guy, how did you get my number? David typed back. It's complicated. I promise I'll explain everything when we meet. Could you bring Kevin and your mom? This is important. There was a longer pause before Derek responded. This is really weird, but okay. Where do you want to meet? David gave him the address of the coffee shop and said he'd be there in an hour. As he sat in his car outside the shop, waiting for them to arrive, David thought about Michael and wondered what his brother would think about this moment. When Derek, Kevin, and Patricia walked into the coffee shop, David recognized them immediately from the photos in the investigator's report. Patricia looked tired but determined, while Derek and Kevin seemed curious and a little nervous. David stood up and waved them over to his table. Derek, Kevin, I'm David Thompson. As they sat down, Patricia studied his face with an expression David couldn't quite read. Mr. Thompson, Derek said, I have to ask, how do you know about what happened to us? And why do you want to help? David took a deep breath. This was it. The moment he'd been both dreading and anticipating since he'd learned the truth. There's something I need to tell all of you, he began. Something that's going to be hard to believe, but I have proof. He looked directly at Patricia. 15 years ago, I had a younger brother named Michael Thompson. We had a terrible fight and he disappeared from my life completely. I've been looking for him ever since. Patricia's face went completely white. Her hand moved to her throat and she whispered, Michael. Patricia, David said gently. Derek and Kevin aren't just two young men who were treated unfairly. They're my nephews. You're my sister-in-law, and I've been searching for my brother's family for years, never knowing that Michael had taken your name when you got married. The silence at the table was deafening. Derek and Kevin looked back and forth between David and their mother, confusion written all over their faces. Mom, Kevin said quietly. What's he talking about? Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Your father, she whispered. Your father's real name was Michael Thompson. The coffee shop seemed to fade away around them as Patricia reached into her purse with shaking hands. She pulled out her wallet and removed a small, worn photograph that she always carried with her. It showed her and Michael on their wedding day, both of them young and smiling. She handed the photo to David, who looked at it for a long moment before his own eyes filled with tears. That's him, David whispered. That's my little brother. Derek and Kevin sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they were hearing. Their father had never told them about having a wealthy brother. In fact, he'd rarely talked about his family at all, always saying that Patricia and the boys were all the family he needed. I don't understand, Derek finally said. Dad never mentioned having a brother. Patricia wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. Your father and David had a falling out before I met him. Michael never wanted to talk about it much, but I know it hurt him deeply. He said they had different ideas about what was important in life. David nodded sadly. We fought about money and success. I was so focused on building my business that I lost sight of everything else. Michael tried to tell me I was becoming someone he didn't recognize, but I was too proud to listen. What exactly happened? Kevin asked. David ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Patricia so much of Michael that it made her heartache. I had started my first tech company and it was taking off fast. I wanted Michael to join me to help me build something huge, but he said I was treating my employees badly, that I cared more about profits than people. He accused me of losing my values. Were you? Derek asked quietly. David was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I probably was. I was young and hungry for success, and I didn't always make the right choices. But instead of listening to Michael's concerns, I got defensive and angry. I told him he was just jealous of my success. Patricia reached across the table and touched David's hand. Michael regretted that fight for the rest of his life. He used to say he wondered if his brother had changed, if maybe they could have worked things out. I regretted it too, David said. I've been looking for him for 15 years. I hired private investigators. I searched social media. I even had my lawyers try to track him down. But when he took your last name, Patricia, it made him almost impossible to find. Derek was still trying to wrap his head around everything. So you're saying our dad had a billionaire brother, and we never knew? Your father was a proud man, Patricia explained. He wanted to build his own life, make his own way. He didn't want anything handed to him, even from family.